Water is so central to everything. And it's the single part of the global agenda that has no agreement. There is nobody representing water. We find it in everything. It's weird. We need representation. This is what my mother said. Inclusivity is a verb. Every second you have to practice it. This is not tick the box and gone. No. This is about continuing this. And I think this is where institutes, and it doesn't matter where we are, government, private sector, NGO, are super bad. Manhattan on the Lower East Side, Hospital Row and the NYCHA housing below, they were hit super hard. Hurricane Sandy flooded the whole region. And the good old Lower East Side Community Collective is led by Damaris Reyes, a woman that's been leading that group of organizations for a long time. And she said, we're not going to work with the government. We don't trust you. In the Netherlands, we have a saying, trust comes by turtle, but it leaves by horse. So, you have to do step by step by step before you build up that trust. But you can blow it up easily.
What you're saying is basically everything moves at the speed of trust. And no matter what you try, you're not going to be able to speed it up. So what you do is you design processes where everybody feels heard and they will arrive at the right conclusion.
The team around me in that house said, Henk, this is going to be your last presentation on rebuild by design. Forget about it. It's not going anywhere. Literally, quote unquote. So I was like, really nervous. So I went in, I gave my best pitch. And then Sean said, okay, we'll try it. And everybody was like, oh no.
Welcome to the Water Data Podcast, where we talk about the science, the stories, and the systems that shape our water future. I'm your host, Veena Srinivasan. Every couple of weeks, we'll chat about how better data and evidence can result in better decision-making and ultimately better outcomes for people and the planet. So if you're a student, a researcher, an innovator, a practitioner, or just curious about how we can better manage this precious resource, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. Hello, welcome to the Water Data Podcast. Today, it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to host Henk Ovink. Henk is best described as a water diplomat, and he has a very long career in international water and basically solving big, grand challenges around water. And most recently, Henk has been the Chief Commissioner of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, and he's also recently taken over as chair of the board of International Water Management Institute. Welcome to the Water Data Podcast, Henk. It's a real pleasure to chat with you today.
It's great to be with you, Veena.
So, Henk, a lot of people who know you in your more kind of visible recent career might not know that you started off being sort of a planner and and an urban designer to some extent. And I was wondering whether you could start off with your origins of, how does one create a water diplomat? So where did that start and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, it's a good start. And thanks so much, Veena, for having me on board, but also being part both of the IWMI journey. I think it's an amazing part. I started. I think when I was little, I had no clue, of course, about this larger world and what to do. I always was a water fanatic, a swimmer, a sailor, a skater. So perhaps that is because I was born in the Netherlands, but also because I love water and being around the water. And when I went to university, I started with mathematics. Moving from mathematics to art, I found myself in the middle of architecture and planning. That was more of a logical outcome. I always also emphasize that my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were architects. So I got a lot of, in my upbringing and the way we looked at the world, a lot of thinking through architecture, but decided against just becoming an architect. I think also because of that. Being so close to what was happening there. And my mother, she was not only the chef and the teacher, but also a director of a school and a real activist, an advocate for women power and empowerment, but also justice, human rights issues, anything around that. So the mix of the two, an architect engineer, solution-oriented, and a real leader on justice issues, activist in the house, were my very fertile breeding ground on which I start to discover the world and what I could do. So it was not so simple saying, oh, I want to become an architect or a planner or a water diplomat. It was the attitude towards the challenges and society at large that really brought me to first planning. And I think the good thing about planning and design is that they try to bring everything together, get real systems understanding. And I think this is a critical foundation also across everything I did beyond it. Really wanting to know everything behind the surface and the complexity and interlinkages. And at the same time, planning and design are about a process, bringing people together. I think that's you could say that's a second pillar on the who I am and how I approach the challenges. The third is also presenting futures, really looking beyond the problems towards what can be done and how that those opportunities and those possibilities really are one grounded in systems thinking and understanding, so not superficial and not one-offs or single stupid solutions to very complex problems. But second, that these opportunities, these solutions are developed together, really figuring out how to, make and build and design and manage a process where everyone can have a seat at the table. And I think that goes back to my mother, where inclusivity for her, she always said, it's a verb. It's not a noun. You have to practice it every day. It is, it takes an exercise and an effort. This is not a tick the box. So I think those are a little bit how I grew in. I started my own little startup, and then, funny enough, but this I can only say looking back, my first assignment was for a water authority. I never thought, this was 1992, that was the beginning of a super long water story. We developed a water awareness project. They had just finished their new wastewater treatment plant and wanted to work with the community of the closest village on water awareness. So I worked with them on this water awareness project. And the second was again a water awareness project for the city of Doesburg, which is a small town in the Netherlands close to the river, on the embankment of the river, to really celebrate water. So it became a drinking fountain where people could go and sit and drink and enjoy not only the river as a part of our delta, but also the mix between that water in the end also ends up in our system for drinking. So two water awareness projects that kicked off my career. I had no clue in 1992 that would be, the blue thread through everything I was doing.
So, Henk, what's really interesting, and I can see that there's a part of your background which is very fundamentally about connecting people and the people side of things to the technical side of things. And that's kind of a thread which goes throughout your design career and then later to your career as a water diplomat, which we'll speak about in a bit. But what made you move from the private sector to the government? How did that shift happen?
I like the question because it has been a part of a real choice. I started my own startup, as I said, started to work. And this was small and really figuring out my place in the world too, with the work I could do. And I went back to university again to study more on landscape architecture, really figuring out and on things on finance and public policy. So it's a journey in itself, but from my own studio, working with many partners, a lot of them public, I must say, cities, municipalities, water authorities, and then joining forces with friends, building out that practice or really around architecture. And then I again understood I'm not an architect, I'm an organizer, perhaps. I'm not sure how to otherwise say. And I stepped out of that partnership. They're still our best friends, so that was a good move. But I'm not the architect. Into an engineering practice for a short time, but it was satisfying. I could add value, but also dissatisfying because I wanted to own the problem. I wanted to be responsible for where the questions were, where our collective issues come together on a desk. So it was a deliberate choice. And when there was an opening at the state of Zuid-Holland, which is one of our provinces, the province of Zuid-Holland, to become director of planning and housing, I applied and I got the job. And it was the first time I worked with the government. I did interim jobs at municipalities and other organizations. I, of course, worked at universities, and in that sense, we're on the public side, but never was a responsible person within a government, and that really changed a lot. The perspective on the issues, my role, and the role of my organization that I could stand for, and how I could navigate those, you could say, those waters. And that's where I felt best, not being the consultant or the partner on the private side, but owning the public problem and really figuring out how to then organize ourselves as a society at large around those issues and come up with a solution. So it shifted everything, I must say.
I have a question around this, which is, we see this over and over again, and particularly in the modern world where one could almost say the single biggest problem is sort of the breakdown of trust around public issues, right? We're seeing this country across country and so on and so forth. So my question is, in your case, your career, which is really about how do you bring people around a common vision so that people then start working with each other instead of cross purposes. Is that so? Firstly, if you could tell us some key insights that you had about what worked or didn't work in terms of doing that. But then, is that a teachable skill? Is that something that you need to be born a Henk Ovink, or can you create Henk Ovinks? Is my question, because we come across this over and over again, and I realize if we only depend on superstars, then we're never going to solve it. At the scale that we need to. We needed almost a mini Henk Ovink at every neighborhood and at every city and so on. So can you tell us a little bit about what you learned, and then which part of that can be abstracted and teachable?
Yeah, it's a super good question, and I think there are so many aspects to this. Society at large is facing larger challenges. I actually think the challenges are still more or less the same, but the redundancy in our system is decreasing, and that means that we have less room to fool around. So we have to, perform better every time, because we can't, with 8 billion people and a growing economy, can just do whatever we want. But 100 years ago or 50 years ago, things were totally different. Post World War II, in the European context, we could, recover from a war and build whatever we want. But our relationship to the environment was totally different than it is to now. Our understanding of those challenges and to society at large. The fact that we don't have that much space to play around, to really explore and figure it out, which is key. If you want to innovate, to move towards a future, you need time and space to play around, to get to learn each other, understand one another, ask questions nobody ever asked before, take a step back, take a pause, walk around, touch, feel. That is key. And I think organizing that, even knowing that there's shrinking redundancy, organizing time, space to be able to, I now say fool around. I never explained it like this, but to be able to have this interaction with one another, with the system, but also with institutes and people, I think is key. And that's also everything against all odds, figuring out that is key to create, with a lack of redundancy, create perhaps imaginary redundancies. And in the sense that everybody feels that there is an opportunity to take time and invest in one another without immediately hasting to conclusions and saying, oh, but we have to, and this, and you, and, the blame game. And I think it's a super good question, Vina. Thank you, because this imaginary redundancy, I never thought about it like that. I described it in a different way in the past. But I think the fact that we need that space as a society is key. But we lost the capacity, not because we don't want or can't, but because the pressures are so tough and are the push for fast to resolve everything at once. And in a political game, everybody wants answers to everybody's problems right away. That immediately undermines the trust that we normally would have given ourselves through that. You could say almost this patience, that slowness that redundancy also gives you in a society. So we lost that capacity, and that's what you then have to create because you need it. You can't jump to conclusions. And I think creating these imaginary redundancies in systems and processes and approaches, and at the same time with a very high ambition, because that's part, organizing such a safe space, as I used to call it, that part is key, but the pressure is still there. It's not a safe space for nothing. It is to achieve something, to overcome challenges, lock-ins, the massive needs from society. So I think the pressure is even bigger or harder. But at the same time, the urgency to stick to that and be consistent in that and really own that. And I think that also to your earlier question, the ownership part is key because it creates the opportunity to co-own these challenges together without it immediately becoming a blame game. And I think that's also a key part.
Let me ask you two questions only because
Yeah.
a lot of people that listen to this podcast are probably early career, fairly young people. And so the idea of imagined redundancy might be very abstract. So I want to kind of see if I can break it down a little bit to how you actually create that, right? Because it's not real redundancy. Real redundancy is like you actually experiment and you fail and then you try again and then you get it right and you don't have time or money to do that. So, is imagined redundancy essentially credible thought experiments? Either they could be actual sort of simulations of stuff, or it could be just stories of, but credible stories of if we actually did this, having people think through how it would happen and then say, okay, no, we don't want to do that, but let's do something else instead. Is that what we mean when we say imagined redundancy? I'm just trying to make it very concrete for a person.
I think perhaps I can explain it with an example. When I worked for the Obama administration, um, it was a different era, of course, than now, but still, the political pressure in the US was on. This was Obama's second term, and he lost the majority in Congress, and the Republicans were going all over the place. This was not a nice collaborative space. And Obama faced this in his first term too. The division and the political division, literally you're either with or against us. The black and whiteness of these discussions, was really aggressive and complex. And then in the second term was even worse. So a hard time to work, like we said, across the aisle. At the same time, this hurricane hit New York City, a city where Republicans and Democrats live together. That region where 8 states were affected. These disasters hit communities all over the place, and the most vulnerable are hit hardest. And often then, as it turned out to be, Republican voters were hit even worse than Democratic voters. So there's a shared need and a burden across political divides. I worked for President Obama's Hurricane Sandy task force, and of course, we got $60 billion from Congress to rebuild this region, a lot in infrastructure. But my role in the task force was to really take a step back constantly and say, hey, but what are we doing? If we're putting $47 billion of infrastructure, energy, roads, rail, etc., as a repair, they better be good. They better be coordinated. They better touch upon systems failures and understanding. We have to figure out how those interdependencies and literally those links in our physical systems are not creating a next disaster, but are laying the ground for real resiliency, but also equity and sustainability, touching upon our core values. So I think the constant stepping back in such a task force was one on the larger, but then on the issue of really looking at the future, community-led. I developed a challenge. The Obama administration had an Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House that oversaw the America Competes Act, and that focused on challenges, but I turned the whole process around and said, this is not a challenge that calls for solutions. This is a challenge where we start to work together and then figure it out. We don't know what the outcome is, but the core is working across communities, political divides, sectors, with everybody and everyone, and bringing in talent, the talent of the region. So anyone who lived there, from the ones that lived there for generations to the ones that are just coming in, and bringing also in the talent that is needed to understand these systems, those environmental, economic, etc. And I think we called it Rebuild by Design because it was about imagining a new future, but it was also about mending what was lost after the disaster and pitting that against the future vision and not against what was lost, was in itself a 9 months of redundancy. And we didn't have that time. So the pressure was on. It was a pressure cooker for everybody. But at the same time, my role and the role of the team was to create the opportunity that everybody did not feel that rush. Right? We only had 9 months, and that we had to move fast. But at the same time, by putting in all our resources and our hearts, our minds, everything working 24/7 with the teams and on the ground, hundreds of community organizations, schools, universities, thousands of people every day, every weekend. It didn't matter. We brought engineers to soup kitchens and activists that rallied Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street became Occupy Sandy, into the teams, talking to Governor Christie, as well as the communities on the shore, etc., etc. I think that super mix of everything created the opportunity to say, okay, it feels like in those 9 months we had 9 years. So you literally create, because that massive focus and a lot of space and room, the opportunity to do 10 times more than you normally would, and created the opportunity to really get to know one another. I mean, there is no proof in that sense, but I remember still. We worked, of course, closely with on Manhattan on the Lower East Side, Hospital Row, and the NYCHA housing below. There's the low-income housing. They were hit super hard. Hurricane Sandy flooded the whole region. And the good old Lower East Side Community Collective is led by Damaris Reyes, a woman that's been leading that group of organizations for a long time, and working with her. And she said, we're not going to work with the government. We don't trust you. For reasons, because before this is on Manhattan, low-income community. They are afraid that their future is real estate, and so that they have to move. So they have a home, they want to stay. But we built trust by just going back and organizing the table. And the mayor said at the presentation of the plans to the jury, which was a jury of federal officials and experts from across. So it can be intimidating too. You have the White House there, and you have to present your plans. You don't know what's going to happen. And she said, with the whole group of 70 people that were representing her team for the work on the Lower East Side, she said, Rebuild by Design made us sit on the same side of the table. And that was a line I'll never forget. And I also never forget because what happened next was Sean Donovan, who was the chair of the task force and also the chair of the jury, was sitting next to me. He was a former housing commissioner in New York on the Blooming, so he's a dear friend. And he said to me, in a very low voice, he said, "Well, that was different when I was housing commissioner because, the Lower East Side community, the NYCHA housing, and the housing commission, there's always a tension. How do you propel?" So for him at that time, when he was housing commissioner, it didn't work, and here it worked. And the mayoress heard him say that to me. She ran to the table, smacked her hand on the table, and said, "I can easily sit back on the other side again." And that showed the tension that
The fragility of the trust also.
Yeah. In the Netherlands, we have a saying: trust comes by turtle, but it leaves by horse. So you have to do step by step by step before you build up that trust. But you can blow it up easily. So it's this what my mother said: inclusivity is a verb. Every second you have to practice it. This is not tick the box and gone. No. This is about continuing this. And I think this is where institutes, and it doesn't matter where we are, government, private sector, NGO, are super bad. Consistency, and I think this is what we did with Rebuild by Design. We turned a process, an initiative under the Obama administration into an NGO, a 501c3 in the US. And it's still it's still there. And it's still working with the communities. So there's always a place you can always go to. And I think the fact that you are, and that's also accountability. That's also what I like about the public side. Take the heat. You are there. You have to continue that commitment that you showed. But in a policy environment that is tougher and tougher. In the past, we would make plans. We had a research, 100 years, 200 years, visions, the next 50, 100 years, plans, the next 25, 50 years, strategies, etc., and then programs and projects. And we're heading to this future. But now it's like the future is here. Oh no, there. Oh, it's there. Oh, it's today. It's tomorrow. It's yesterday. It's so inconsistent, and also the ownership of the ones that could help continuously anchor ourselves on that path. These missions, as Mariana Mazzucato was, these missions, these avenues. In Belgium, they have a beautiful word for this: pistes, like a slope. You go down a mountain, you have a lot of redundancy, and at the same time, you know where you're going. You take time, you can really explore that opportunity, but at the same time, you're heading for that same future. I think we don't give ourselves that opportunity because we say we don't have time. And that is, I'm not saying a lie, but it's a mistake. Because we say we don't have time, we spoil time in all this stupidity and make all the mistakes without learning, and then have to do it over and over and over again, but we organize the wrong process. But if you would say, oh, but we take the time, an imaginary redundancy, we just pretend we have the time, it speeds up. There's an interesting example in the Netherlands. Room for the River is this massive program where after 1995 and 1993, when massive floods, almost flooded super large parts of the Netherlands. We evacuated in 1995 250,000 people. For the Netherlands, it was a big thing, but it was a wake up call.
It's a chunk of the population.
Yeah, it's a chunk. Yeah. It feels but the planning on this had started in the 80s. We had a plan, Stork, it was called, by a collective of landscape architects and community organizations and scientists that already said, hey, our riverine system is not fit for the future. So the almost disaster landed on top of also already this massive research and outreach, and we moved ahead. And in 2021 or 2022, but I think 2021, the last project was inaugurated. So it took us from the 80s to, you could say 30, 40 years to really do this. But we stuck to that vision, and now it works. So it helps being consistent. But it also helps to have redundancy and consistency, so you can shift course. It's not about that you just do one thing. No, it's this explorative redundancy that is key. Yeah.
If you find this episode to be valuable, please like the video and check out more episodes of the show. And don't forget to subscribe to the Well Labs YouTube channel. And if you think someone else, maybe a colleague, a student, a friend, or a fellow water enthusiast, might find this show useful, do share it with them. We hope to reach many more change makers like you. So, I mean, you said many things. And again, I'm going to slow down only because it's completely fascinating and completely different from almost anything I've heard on this podcast, but also the way people are taught how to do stuff especially in a country like India, right? You're always taught technical people know best. Communities are inherently ignorant. They don't know what they want. And what you're saying is that no, basically everything moves at the speed of trust. And no matter what you try, you're not going to be able to speed it up. So, in a sense, what you do is you design processes where everybody feels heard and they will arrive at the right conclusion. And if you're really a good engineer, you should take the time to explain what the pros and cons, and also be willing to listen to people and then shift course, because the community tells you they usually have very good reasons to say we shouldn't go in this direction. But what you're saying is that if you don't take the time, you're essentially going to be so much worse off and you're going to have to do it again, that it's almost worth investing in the time. But what you said is, if you don't have time, essentially, one of the ways you're creating this imagined redundancy is by throwing a ton of resources and people at it. You're saying we have only 9 months. We want every single person to feel like they've been heard and every single community to feel like they've bought into this larger rebuild in that case. But we're going to give them time. And the way we create the time is by bringing many participants in, many fora, many communities. So every single person kind of feels heard and buys in, because then what you end up with is so much richer, which is why right from the beginning you said it's planning is process more than anything else. It's not facts, it's not rigid engineering templates. Did I get that right?
Yeah, spot on, Rena.
So I guess my question is then, when you say it, it sounds obvious and also doable, and yet very few people actually do it nonetheless, right? Because that's why we run into so many of the problems we run into. So my question is, can this be taught? Can you teach people how to create imagined redundancy? So essentially, can you teach people inclusivity? Can you teach people practice of inclusivity? Can you teach people practice of patience, to not hurry something faster than the speed of trust? How do you teach a young generation of professionals these soft skills, if you want to call it that, or what would you call it? What would you teach them?
Yeah, it's tough because the context is key. But I think teaching people the capacity to listen, ask questions, be no
Present.
matter the challenges, be patient, um, dare to dare to dare to want to understand everything, don't jump to conclusions. Also, go against the stream. And when people say it's impossible, say, well, I don't know. We'll figure this out. And I remember Rebuild by Design as an idea in the task force got nowhere. We were, I had Kevin Bush, who was a trainee in the U.S. federal government. A trainee is called a presidential management fellow. Sounds super cool, right? But a youngster, the hip youngster, me and Kevin. And the rest of the task force, and also part of my work, was about the 60 billion, the communities, the accountability to the White House and the world. So Rebuild by Design was something that I imagined as an opportunity to really innovate. And that was against the idea that challenges were important, and the task force wanted to identify challenges. And I said, they presented this, smart grid challenge, a rebuild challenge, a finance challenge. But those were pre-designed, conceptualized, public and private sector owned, already say, oh, let's do this. But I said, we don't know what happened. We don't know what the community felt. We don't know what the future looks like. So we have to understand the systems first together, and that redundant. So understanding it together is way better than an engineer or a scientist coming in and saying, this is what it is. No, that's not what you feel. You have to understand it together to be able to develop alternatives together. And you can't understand it alone and then say, oh, let's come together. No, because everybody will live in their own world. So that process of understanding together is key. You can't send in a group of, even if they're the smartest kids on the block and say, this is the future. People say, it's not my future. Yeah, well, how do you know? So I think that's part of really doing that. So it was way too complex for the task force. So we were, somewhere in the appendices of the draft report. And then I had to present it to the task force meeting, so cabinet meeting. And my team, the team around me in the task force said, Henk, this is going to be your last presentation on Rebuild by Design. Forget about it. It's not going anywhere. Literally, quote unquote. So I went there, and this is to the leadership. So you need all these people. Sean Donovan, who was overseeing the task force, and we prepped in beforehand, and he said, I don't know how it will go. So I was like, really nervous. So I went in, I gave my, I hope, best pitch. And then the team was like almost mentally holding my hand and saying, this is it. Forget about your dream. We're doing all the other good work. I mean, we're doing amazing work. It's not that we're not doing amazing. We're doing amazing work. But this part's not going to fly. And then Sean said, okay, we'll try it. Yeah. And everybody was like, oh no. Henk and Sean, best friends. This is not going to work. So we were, on the Rebuild by Design, which was a very small part of all the work we were doing. We were at, I think, 140 people in DC and 70 people in Jersey. So, I mean, we were a large group because we had to do so many things. This was really not important. And then I went to fundraise for this because the federal government dollars only could go to the solutions, not to the process. So I needed philanthropy. And I found 6 funders. I also didn't want one funder because politically that's very complex. In New Jersey, people distrust certain funders, but trust others. So money has to be neutralized by a group, which is fine. And then it doesn't matter if a smaller funder gives a small part and a larger funder a big part, as long as they are together. So I brought in 6 funders, but I got a large portion, and I came into the task. I still remember I came into the task because everybody's like, whoa, what, you really achieve. And I said, it's not the money, it's the approach. But because of all of a sudden it became a reality, we moved from the appendices to recommendation number 2 out of 60. So it's interesting that all of a sudden, because it became a realistic idea, so nobody was against it, just nobody believed it was possible. And I think we lost, in that sense, also our capacity to dream beyond the limitations and say, we have to try because there, in the context of the challenges we face, we have to try. Even if we fail, we try again.
I think one thing that you haven't said is, Henk, which might be unique to you, is you have to fundamentally believe in human beings and the essential goodness
Yeah.
of human beings, and what we have in common is more than what we have as differences, because otherwise you're not going to
Yeah.
even be able to start. I mean, one of the reasons people give up, they're always like, okay, those guys will never listen to us, like you said, right, about the case in the community and the housing commissioner in Lower East Side. I wanted to segue from there. Now, you've kind of done this big thing now of solving a massive, complex problem in the US. What made your ambition then go from saying, okay, now I want to solve this at the global scale, right? Which is all of the work that went into being the Dutch envoy to the UN, the the UN conference, and then eventually the Global Commission. Was it that you'd done this and you said, okay, it is possible, we can bring people together around complex problems if you create imagined redundancy, and then we can actually solve big problems, and I'm going to actually, is that how that worked, or was it a deliberate decision to say, now I want to go global?
Yeah, also, this asset, like the work for the Obama administration, was a relationship that you built up. I think the envoyship also came out of that relationship. At that time, because the Dutch government put me on a loan to the federal government. I was Director General for Water and Planning in the Netherlands, and then was put on a loan to the federal government in the US to work on that. And there were two ministers, cabinet people in the Netherlands, Liliane Ploemen and Melanie Schultz, now Melanie Maas. And Liliane and Melanie, Liliane was responsible for development cooperation, and Melanie for infrastructure and environment. And they called me, and we had conversations over the summer, and this was the summer of 2014, on indeed this the global perspective. So much needs to happen. How can we scale? What is that? What is, the challenge is massive. What lies on that horizon? But it was also the year where the world was prepping for the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, Finance for Development, the Sendai Framework, and even the Quito Urban Agenda a year after, 2016. So 2014 was this year of, testing out of how our global conversations work out and how challenging it was also 2014, the year where Xi and Obama signed this carbon deal to lower the tension, create space in the conversation on a Paris Agreement a year ahead. In this year, we had this conversation, and then we sat down and said, water is so central to everything. And it's the single part of the global agenda that has no agreement. There is nobody representing water. We find it in everything. Nobody is championing it. We find it in everything. It's it's undermining the achievement of our goals, but it can empower all and help catalyze those solutions, policies, our way of understanding systems, and then present opportunities. So it's weird. We need representation. So that was more or less the larger question. What does then that representation look like? We had no clue. But the fact that water was the gem in it, that was totally undervalued, mismanaged, and misunderstood, and that we had to figure this out. Also, of course, on top of a history of water governance in the Netherlands, that both Melanie and Liliane understood that could be a trustworthy proposition to the world, coming from a country where water was central to its existence, not only physical, but also in the way we run our political system. They said there's credibility in the fact. If we do this from the Netherlands, there is an opportunity that we can spark a larger conversation. If it comes from somebody else, it might not. So it was noblesse oblige, as Melanie always liked to say. There is a responsibility part of it. I mean, beyond that. So I was asked to develop a concept and then figure out how that would work. And it was interesting. We already did quite a bit on water internationally, but it was very fragmented, of course, and it also did not have a solid base. So one of the first things I did was to initiate a large research. And that again comes from this mix of me being a planner and a community-led worker and a scientist and a policymaker. So developed a program we later, at that time, called the Geography of Future Water Challenges, because I said I want to map all the water challenges of the world in their interdependencies. So water and security, water and health, water and the environment, water and food and energy and climate, etc., urbanization, etc. It's interesting that we're with a group of organizations that we said, oh yeah, it's amazing because it will help us understand way better around the world how these linkages work. The pushback came from the ministries because they said, oh, what's coming out of this? And I said, so what are you afraid of? Well, perhaps we're not doing the right things. I said, that doesn't, it's not a judgment tool, it's insight. So even if, the research will never say you do the wrong thing, but can help you strengthen where you might be a little bit off or way off. But it's not a judgment tool. But the fear, so this is again to where we are afraid of the truth because it might tell us we're doing something that's not beneficial for the goals we set. And that's another challenge, is that, if you're afraid to understand this complex reality, not because of the complex reality, but because it might tell you that you have to change, whoa, then you're so far away from figuring out what you can actually do, where your talent can actually work. So it was again super good learning exercise on also how to set up internal governance.
What changed their mind on that? Because,
Nice governance, yeah. We just did it. Yeah. They didn't change their mind until they saw the result. No, it took a couple of years. Yeah.
Is there, though, an element where, again, I'm just asking this question about trust. So in the sense, if you had done it and you go to the press and say, they're terrible because they did all these things wrong, then you break trust. But if you go back to them saying, here's an opportunity, then
Right.
maybe they see it differently. Is that part of it, where they have to feel you created the safe space to kind of then move forward?
Yeah, and I think you also have to play with this because this was not about a blame game. This is about building more knowledge for everybody. So in the end, it was a present. I got funding. I gave it to them and said, look what this is amazing. And then we built on top of that water as leverage based on part of that research. So, in that sense, this is never, it's never a hammer or or a gun. These are real good tools that help, are informing approaches forward and trying to empower the people that work with it. And I think what was interesting, it was also, of course, about the power dynamics. I was appointed, but it was a new role. So people were also really distrustful in that sense, thinking, is he going to take away part of my work? I said, no, I'm going to help you do your work better. You just got additional resources. I'm not here to compete, but to collaborate. But in institutions, and it doesn't matter where you are, in a university, a private sector place, or a government, we lost a little bit or a lot the capacity that resources are there to collaborate, to add value, and not there to compete. And I think this is also, perhaps it also comes back to the fact that this idea of efficiency was born on cutting time. But the two have nothing. It's like totally different worlds. But a managerial, you could say, consultancy view on efficiency is just cut time and people. Yeah, that you might spend less time and less people, but the result is also terrible. So, hey, it's not
And
efficient.
then you spend more time
it's
fixing it.
stupid.
So
Right.
essentially,
Yeah, the
right.
fixing. Yeah, fixing takes forever. So, in the sense that effectiveness comes in, I don't like these positions, but you really have to figure out why are you doing what we're doing. And if we don't understand the problem, we have to figure it out again, and then we go back again. We need to continuously ask ourselves that those questions to be able to move ahead. And I think we just don't afford ourselves the time for that. And that's the redundancy question again. If we build that in, we create the opportunity. I've chaired many complex political conversations, and one of them was the water conversations between the Israelis and the Palestinians for 7.5 years until October 7th, through 2 Gaza wars. And we had a very strict process. There were rules. We kept to them. But we continuously created a redundant space with consistency, continuity, and commitment across 2 of my government that supported that process, to make sure that we were always there. We always held ourselves and them accountable to the agenda, to the follow-up. It went back and forth, but there was real progress for all in that room every time, over and over again, and it pays off. But it doesn't, you just don't come in with, a consultancy process and say, oh, got some time and some resources and we'll make you more efficient. No, it's not. This is not how it works. Look at the result of a Paris Agreement. We're 10 years after, and we brought in, after Paris, a consultancy approach. It didn't help. No. We lack our learning. And I think that's a shame, because if we're able to do these things differently, the empowerment beyond our differences and the fact that we can deliver on things that we think are unachievable is there. We human beings can do an amazing amount of work together. It's fantastic, but we have to try. Yeah.
Do you have our episodes running in the background? If you're curious about a technical term that we use or an acronym we've forgotten to expand, check out our video episodes on YouTube. We have on-screen explanations that might be useful. So I want to actually ask one question about water as leverage before we go to the Global Commission. So in water as leverage, of course, it was a big Dutch program to kind of try some of these collaborative, integrative, inclusive methodologies in cities around. And it didn't work equally well everywhere, right? It worked better in some places like Indonesia than in other places. Again, what's the secret sauce then? So you've got now a process or a methodology, but then when you roll it out, it doesn't always work out in exactly the same way. So what's the secret sauce for making these processes work?
Yeah, I think water as leverage showed again how also when you compare it to rebuild, how important it is that you can spend everything, time-wise on these approaches. I think the success and failure of water as leverage more or less was with the teams, and part of it with the supporting organization. And I think with Rebuild by Design, we We navigated that differently. We put so much capacity in the supporting organization that was the cushion where the failures could land on, and we could mitigate, all those. But here it was a little bit the other way around. And also the compared to rebuild design, we had it's easier to work in the New York region than in the Asia region for many ways because the challenges are harder, but the cultural differences across. We worked in India, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, totally uncomparable regions. So the good thing is there was a lot of learning back and forth. We brought the teams and communities and representatives to Singapore in this case a couple of times to learn from one another, and I think there was a lot of that that is now more or less spilling forward in what is happening in Khulna, Semarang, and Chennai. But it doesn't easily mean that everything was a success. And I think also there was a limitation on resources. We were granted an opportunity with a limit and not unlimitless. And I think the contrary happened with Rebuild by Design. We were granted a limited amount of resources to access an almost unlimited amount of resources for the implementation. So the millions that were invested in the process unlocked literally billions from the federal government to spend on these resiliency projects. It's amazing. I lived in New York for the last 3 years, seeing those projects being developed and the community embracing them, saying, "Oh, look, this is ours.
We made this. It's our project."
Right. Yeah. It's amazing. So Water as Leverage had a totally different also context of realization. As a point to this and how amazing it was, at the end also almost a 9-month process. In the end, we brought everybody to Singapore, the teams, the communities, the representatives of the cities, and the financial partners in this room presented there. And it was a fantastic 3 days, 3 days, where also candid conversations between government officials. Why can't you do it? So pushing, pushing all buttons and, pressing all the ambitions and really having the tough conversations with the ones that needed to make the decision. Also created this environment of trust where people could really be honest. And the interesting thing was, in the end, we presented the last result on one wall with the results of all the conversations. And I still remember the water rep director of the Green Climate Fund at that time, standing in front of the room, standing up, looking at his colleagues from the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and Islamic Development, all the financial partners, the Germans, the French, the Dutch, etc. And he said, and he had courage to say that. He said, so, because everybody was enthusiastic and happy. This is amazing. We should do this. It was a good environment, and he said, come on, colleagues, you have to be honest to the teams and to Henk and the team. We can never fund this. And it got silent. And they said, what do you mean? Well, these amazing projects we want to fund, but our systems are not fit for these projects. So when we walk out of this room tomorrow, we just go back to normal. And we will never be able to spend any dollar on these futures. So we have to be honest with them to say either we're going to make it work, but it's going to take a lot on our side, or say they're amazing, but forget about it. And I think that sparked again another conversation on how are we going to match institutionally how the things that we need to do are not coming from the right policies and regulations that we currently have in place, and the way how validation and evaluation works on a financial way, in the context of, if this is what we need to do and this is the system, how are we going to make that match? And I think that created the opportunity with some to actually move that dial, but not with, and that was a big difference with Rebuild. In Rebuild, we said, if we move through this first cycle and everybody agrees, we unlock the billions. We still have to draft the law to unlock those billions, but the designs are the framework through which the billions will be allocated, and not the other way around. The billions are not the framework to which the designs have to work.
Got it. I mean, I think it makes people take the process more seriously as well, because you're telling them that if you follow this process and do it right, you actually will get the money to do this, because otherwise it's a project and people do it, they have a party and go home, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but here comes bluff, because when we started Rebuild by Design, I had the last conversation with the deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget, and he said, explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old, Henk. You are developing a project, a group of projects with everybody, Republicans, Democrats, crazies. You're going to do this massive research, and out of that, these things will emerge. You have no clue what they are right now. And you also tell them some of them might fail, and you see that as a success. And you want the president to sign off on billions. He said, forget about it. You're not getting any of it. So when we started, and this was Sean Donovan, who his leadership was key as a cabinet official, trust person in the Obama government, a true leader. And he said, at the announcement, I still hear him say it, at the announcement, when the question was, how much money is there, Secretary Donovan, for the implementation? And he just said billions. We had no guarantee that $1 was going to be, but we just bluffed because we needed the trust. And we believed, Sean also said, we have to believe in this. You believe in this? Yeah. I said, yeah, I believe in it too. Okay, we have to believe that this works. Otherwise, why are we here? And President Obama really signed off on it because I still have a print of the email that Sean sent me saying, I'm on Air Force One telling the president about Rebuild by Design. He's super excited. He says, quote unquote, this is why I entered office. I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. This is going to be fine. But it took us a year to then, in the end, really got the billions. But it was okay. Yeah. So, but with water as leverage, that promise, we were super clear. We had to convince financiers like development banks and others that this was a good thing to do. And for them, it's way harder to shift from, doing the things that they normally do to doing something different. And I think this is where the ownership, we were less able to create real ownership with our financial partners. So the ownership was there with the community, the government, and the teams massively, but less so with the financial partners.
Fascinating. I want to move on to the Global Commission on Economics of Water. And that was, again, when you started it, it was going to be sort of putting water on the global map. It was going to be the counterpart of the Stern Review for climate change, on the economics of climate change, and the Dasgupta Review on the economics of biodiversity. How did that entire process start? Why did you think that there was a need for a commission on the economics of water? And then how did that play out?
Yeah, I think the lead up to this again was long. So 2015, I plotted with 3 other plotters a high-level panel on water. And that became a high-level panel on water with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President Jim Kim of the World Bank, and 11 heads of state, heads of government, including my own. And the outcome document of that was was structured around three pillars. And the first was about understanding water. That was really about, really about the understanding of this complexity. The second was about valuing water across the board. And the third was about governing and management. And this valuing water, we took as the Netherlands super seriously, because this was at the core where we thought, if we want to change our systems, we have to understand, but also change the way across scales, from very local to global, how we value water. And we started a Valuing Water initiative coming out of this high-level panel. So there was a lot of, you could say, homework on valuation of water, research, but also projects and you could say missions. We had a different word for it, stories, where we brought communities around the world together around valuing water principles. We built a valuing water community, scientific, policy, but also practice with indigenous, with smaller corporates, companies, small farmers, larger corporates, finance sector, government, across. So there's this whole dynamic on valuation of water. Second, we volunteered to co-host together with Tajikistan the 2023 Water Conference. That also came out of ups and downs. We tried to get to this conference in 2018. The resolution on that totally flawed, so we had to do it again during the pandemic. Then it worked. It's not easy to get multilateral systems to work with and for one another. But once we had that, one and one for us became two, where we say, okay, we have to put together a budget for this conference. We want to do it right. We want to make sure that this conference is really, an anchor towards some, this could not resolve all our answers, but at least set a foundation for a follow-up. This is now also the moment to take valuing water to that level of a global, you could say, benchmark, or at least, validity, taking inspiration from Stern and Dasgupta and saying, hey, look how the Stern report helped change the narrative around climate change. It was 2007, Stern, 8 years before Paris. So there was in that sense, a game changer report. So we said, and we now have the opportunity to put together also a serious budget to make this a serious effort, to see this through, not as a promise, but really to be able to deliver. And then came the interesting conversation internally, where the idea of a leading author like Stern or Dasgupta was presented, and we got like a list of names, and I said, no, I can't go with this. I don't believe that a single, and sorry to say, but these were white males like myself, but a little older, are going to convince. I'm not saying they're bad professionals. They're probably amazing, the ones I knew and the ones I didn't know, but they're not going to resolve the fact how the world is valuing water. We have to organize this differently. So I said, can't we get a group? Can't we get, a group together around the world? And I think I called Tharman Shanmugaratnam first. And Tharman at that time was senior minister in Singapore. He was an economist, advisor to IMF and the G20, etc., and a good friend. I'd known him for quite a while then, and I said, Tharman, we have this ambition, but I have a larger vision with this, to bring together a larger group. And he said, oh, yeah, no, I mean, I want to help. So we plotted together with him, and then we brought in Johan Rockström, the climate water scientist running Potsdam Institute, and Mariana Mazzucato, and Ngozi, but also Juita and Aro Ravi and Quinton Grafton. So with the 7, we had you could say a solid core group, and then we started to build that out until we got to, we had 24 at a certain point, but Inga Kahl, she passed away during the commission time. And I think we even have 25. One mayor, Control from New Orleans, she couldn't make it in the end, but we had Yvonne Oki Sawyer as a mayor from Freetown. So there was a little bit of a back and forth, but we had a solid 22 commissioners. Every continent represented, but also every generation, a youth activist and a woman in her 80s, gender positive, which was key for me to make sure that this was not a male dominant economist, white. No, this is about how we value water. This is not finance, this is economics. So this is about valuation. This is about all values at all scales across everything. And of course, this was totally complex because this group did not agree. And I think that was the right thing to do, to make sure that we had a group of people in a room that not by design agreed, but by design had to figure this out. So next to the 22, we had a massive amount of resources for research in institutions also from across the world to bring that in. And this was not things, there were conflicts in the group. Quinton stepped out because, it was too complex for him and the group to figure this out. And we still worked with him, but in a different way. So it was not easy. It was not an easy process. But that's okay. These things are not meant to be easy. These things are meant to be, magnificent. So I think the process showed that the complexity, facing this complexity, if you design the approach as complex, it's going to be messy, but good. Yeah.
So, of course, the commission arrived at the 5 missions, and around circularity and energy and food security and ecosystems, leaving no one behind. All of that, which I think people can look up. But I think there was one really key thing about the report that I thought we could chat a little bit about, which is, before this, water was always thought of as a local subject, in the sense,
Right.
we don't have to worry about water in Yemen or Tajikistan or whatever else, because water is not a global commons. It's a local commons, and so countries can essentially figure it out themselves. And I think one of the major contributions of the the Global Commission on Economics of Water is saying, hey, once the water falls, it can be local. But the thing is, where water even comes from, we all basically share a global hydrocommons in terms of how water in the atmosphere moves around the planet. And so, what one country chooses to do with its equatorial forest is going to have an impact on somebody else's rainfall. And how accepting do you think countries are to say we're willing to have a global conversation on water because we do share a common hydrological cycle?
Yeah, and this is the complexity of the world. I think and we have a 2026 and a 2028 UN conference. We just agreed in New York last week, the week before, on the themes. So yes, the world can come together and say this is important, and we have to do it. At the same time, the pushback on that a global conversation should be on local issues and not on global issues is massive. So the fact that we emphasized, and I think there are a couple of points really important in, again, the report is understanding first in its full complexity, and then think what we can do. And this full complexity understanding is about the hydrological cycle. So really unpacking every aspect of that, like we did, and saying, and this is the technical part, we talk about blue and green water, and blue water is everything we know, water in our rivers, lakes, streams, our groundwater, our ocean, that is evaporating and raining back down, and the majority of that is on our oceans, and the rest is on land. But then we have transpiration and evapotranspiration that brings in rain, that comes from green water, And that is water from our soils, our plants, our biodiversity at large, to simplify it. So both components are key, because for rain on land, which we need for our environment, our food, our survival, uh, half of it comes from transpiration, not evaporation. So managing water is about managing land for half of the time. And the Commission said, um, the link between water, biodiversity, and climate change is key. And it's about these links between blue and green. Second, we unpacked how not only the water that we know, but also the other part on biodiversity plays out in all our sustainable development goals, global goals that we have to work on across all scales. And third, these flows of water that come from transpiration, so rain in the Amazon is linked also across the Latin American continent all the way to the US, and rains in Africa and China come from other continents. So these dependencies beyond countries, even beyond continent,
What you call
make that
atmospheric rivers in the report.
atmospheric risk. Yeah, connect us across the world. So the link between biodiversity, climate, and water, the SDGs, and these atmospheric rivers show that you can't deal with water only local. Yes, you have to deal with it local and national and regional, but also intercontinental and global. And second, you have to figure out as a world how we get behind an agenda that helps to stabilize and stabilize the hydrological cycle, but also ensures that there's water equity for all. And I think this is where uh, global things come up. It's not only because things play physically out global, that there are flows. It's also because, in the interest of all, that everybody has access to safe drinking water, to hygiene facilities and sanitation. Everyone, even if those are only local solutions, that is demands global action. So it's policy, it's politics, but it's also systems that makes that a global agenda to this is key.
Got it. Hank, I know we've been chatting for a while and I feel like we could chat for many hours more, but in the interest of time, I thought what I would do is I would direct, and we will add links to the Global Commission report so people can go and look it up themselves. But what do you think this happens next, and especially with the next two UN global conferences? What's kind of the hope and dream for those two?
Yeah, so I think with the Commission, what is interesting, the Commission's report and insights across all both our findings and our recommendations is sparking a lot of ideas and opportunities. So we see partnerships across the board on finance water, valuing water, on green water flows that are transboundary in Central Asia and the Middle East, on partnerships with private sector and finance sector on reuse and reuse ambitions all the way to a reuse goal at the UN conference, country proposals in Barbados and Mexico, G20, South African summit on financing. So and even the teams and the background of the teams of the the 2026 UN Water Conference are sparked by this. And also, I must say, I was in New York a week ago when the themes were discussed and the issues on water. I haven't heard the word hydrological cycle mentioned in the UN context so many times as this year, because we never mentioned the hydrological cycle. We only talked about wash and water and disasters and climate. So yes, we anchored a new understanding, and it doesn't mean that all of a sudden we know what to do. That's fine. These things take time, but the fact that that our report, our findings, the link to the hydrological cycle, the economy, society, environment, to equity, to justice is there, is amazing. And it is a foundation, it's a layered cake. You build layer upon layer upon layer. And it takes time, this is not about speed. This is about, again, figuring out how we are going to do this together, and this will never go away. So I think that is one. Second, 2026 and 2028 are key in the lead up to the post 2030 agenda. So how does that agenda look like? And as we see how the world challenges multilateralism and more. And I think in the context of how are we going to redevelop an agenda together as a world, water is going to be really helpful. It provides us with the opportunity to come together because it is linked to everything and everyone. It provides us with the opportunity to organize a process that is about understanding, valuation, governing, but also solutions. It helps understand that there is an alternative, and that the things that we do, we don't need to do. We can do something different that is as aspirational, as inspirational, and really groundbreaking with the change that is needed, but without, you could say, the hatred or distrust that we currently feed into these discussions. So I think there is an opportunity, but again, it will take time. We mentioned in the report the Global Pact. I don't care about words, but the fact that everybody agrees that water is important for everything and everyone, and we don't agree on what that then is a little bit stupid. But it also should not lead to bureaucracy. It should lead to empowerment and informing societies as large what to do. So I think we can take the time in the coming first 1.5 years towards 2026 and then beyond on how that works. This week, actually tonight, I fly to Zimbabwe for the Wetlands COP, where we're going to have a first high-level roundtable on exploring, learning from existing agreements and multilateral environmental agreements like climate, like biodiversity, like desertification and wetlands. How can we use them better for water? But also, what can water learn from them? And is there something that we have to explore towards 2026 and beyond? And I really look forward to work with the world and figure this out and see what it is that in 2026 that we can say, oh, this might be a foundation of something that is really, perhaps creating that redundancy in our multilateral system to ensure that we move better ahead.
Fantastic. Hank, I've really learned a lot today, and I really hope that some of our younger listeners and who are just starting their careers will kind of realize that there's something that you've said over and over and over again throughout the entire talk today, which is, I mean, you called it imagined redundancy, but this idea that don't rush to kind of find the solution, but let the solution kind of almost slow cook, right? It has to emerge through this process of trust building. And you don't want to, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are and how much data you have and how smart you are. And that's not what you want to kind of stuff down everybody's throat. But you kind of want to really design processes of dialogue. So basically, then everybody owns the solution. And what you get is, at the end, much more sustainable, much more long lasting, because everybody takes ownership. So I really learned a lot. And I think I'm going to change the way we do things here at Well Labs because of this conversation. But thank you so much for chatting with us today, and hope to have many more conversations with you outside, just so that just learn more from your wisdom.
Thank you, Veena. Thanks so much.
That's it for this episode of the Water Data Podcast. Thank you for listening till the end. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the Well Labs YouTube channel and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. You can find the Water Data Podcast on all major podcast platforms. Until then, stay curious and stay connected. Thank you.